Hi, my name is Lori Groh. I'm co-owner at Shoreside Therapies, and today we have again with us Julie Abdullah, and we are going to
Hey.
talk about. Hi, Julie.
Hey.
Um, we're going to talk about the do's and don'ts of supporting a loved one that is suffering from OCD. And I'm really excited to talk about this today because there are a lot of people in situations where they're the caretaker or they're the spouse or they're the friend of somebody that has OCD, and they might not know exactly what to do, how to help. Um, a question
Mhm.
that I get a lot in sessions is, how do I not enable it, but at
Mhm.
the same time be loving and caring and supportive? And sometimes those two things kind of mismatch,
Yeah.
So I'm very excited to talk about this today, Julie.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great intro to this because, if we have someone in our lives that struggle with OCD, we just want them to feel better,
Yeah.
whether that's our kids or our spouse. And feeling better can look a few different ways. So we'll
Mhm.
talk kind of about the do's and don'ts of that, how to
Oh,
support in a healthy way.
that sounds great. Thanks again for being here.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. So I think the first thing I'll say is really just to encourage your loved one to go to therapy. So we talked last week about what kinds of therapy is helpful for OCD,
Mhm.
that being exposure and response prevention. And so doing that therapy as soon as possible if you have a child, or encouraging your partner to seek exposure and response prevention therapy is the number one way that you can be supportive, if they're not, doing therapy already. So
Mhm.
that is what I would say is kind of the best way to
Yeah.
begin that support.
Yeah. So maybe if you were a parent or a spouse, I mean, that might be similar as far as researching to find someone. I mean,
Hmm.
obviously you'd be a wonderful resource for somebody, but
Yeah.
looking around and seeing who might be the right fit for their
Hmm.
spouse or child. So that's like the
Hmm.
number one thing, right? We talked a little bit last time on, it just gets worse. It's not something that just kind of gets better on its own.
Hmm.
So that treatment piece and getting them in there as soon as possible is that number
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Hmm.
All right.
Yeah. So other ways, like I mentioned, and you were talking in the beginning, we want to help our loved one experience less anxiety, which is really just the core of OCD, is feeling that anxiety at pretty intense levels a lot of the time. And so a lot of us will kind of naturally want to reassure our partner or our child, or a
Right.
friend, and help them feel better in the moment. So it might look like saying something like, everything's going to work out, or you did nothing bad, everything's going to be okay. And these are
Mhm.
things that a lot of us love to hear, and they help bring down that anxiety pretty quickly in the moment. This can get tricky with OCD, because it gets in the way of that relearning that anxiety isn't dangerous and that it can come down over
Yeah.
time. And so reassurance kind of cuts that short and does reduce the anxiety, but it's really more of a short term fix and doesn't end up
Mm.
having that person develop a healthy relationship with their anxiety.
Yes, that part's so important, right?
Hmm.
You're saying it in such an interesting way because what it's doing is stopping that potential natural, maybe
Hmm.
self-regulation that could occur by reassuring or saying like, "Hey, it's going to be okay. Don't worry about it. It's fine." Or depending on what is actually the behavior, it could be related to the behavior as well. Of, you don't need to do
Right.
that. Nobody here is sick, for an example, right? Like it's okay,
Hmm.
nobody's sick, to calm
Hmm.
somebody down when they're feeling that anxiety. But so what you're saying is that after the treatment or during treatment, because you want to do that first before probably using some of those techniques.
Hmm.
But during that course of treatment, probably also talking to the provider, but
Yeah.
making sure that you're not doing some of the reassuring in order to help that anxiety reduce. You want that to be more internal for the client, for them to not be so
Yeah.
scared about it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this
Okay.
is really hard at first for both parties. The
Yeah.
person that's struggling with anxiety wants to be reassured, of course. And then
Yes.
if it's our child or our spouse, we want to reassure them. And so breaking that cycle can be really difficult in the beginning. Um, but
Yeah.
like you said, it's most important to help them through the anxiety rather than reduce their anxiety. So there's ways that we can be supportive, and I'll talk about that, of helping them through without reducing it.
Yeah, I love that difference right there, because it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean you're not helping, right? It just
Right.
means that looks different. All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Before we get into that, I'll say another common way that we can kind of get in the way of therapy for OCD with our loved one is by accommodating. So this can look a
Mm,
little bit more like a behavior that we're doing to help them reduce their anxiety. For kids, this could be helping them avoid a place or a chore maybe at home that does cause a lot of anxiety for them.
yeah.
Maybe, again, it could be reassurance as well. It could be, you know, accommodating your schedule so that they're
Mhm.
able to perform their rituals and feel better for the day. Again, more of a short term fix, not going to help their
Right.
treatment in the long term. For
Yeah,
us,
that's really important. Yes. Oh, go on.
mm-hmm.
Go on. I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's okay. Yeah. So that could look like those are ways to accommodate in children. If it's a partner, we could be reducing their responsibilities with work
Mm,
or things around the house, maybe doing things for them because of the anxiety that they're experiencing. Maybe you're
mhm.
censoring yourself and avoiding certain topics or words because of how triggering it could be for them. These are things that we want to watch out for because they can really get in the way of, again, relearning that anxiety is something that they can tolerate and helping them build their own self confidence around being able to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And that part's tough, I think, too, especially, I'm kind of looking in the lens of a parent on how that could be really tough to
Mm-hmm.
distinguish, because sometimes you don't know exactly if the child's having anxiety about something, like if they're going to start their like gymnastics or something, and
Mm-hmm.
they're feeling pretty anxious, and at first they said, yeah, I want to go, that seems fun, and then as time gets closer, no, that seems boring, or I don't want to do it. And so that sometimes is
Yeah.
tricky, right? To know, is it is it really that they're just thinking it's going to be boring, or is there more to it? Is there more of an anxiety situation going on? And that can be tricky, right?
That can be really tricky. I
Yeah.
think you bring up a good point because there's a lot that underlies underneath the surface of that. So, as
Mhm.
much as you can, having a conversation with your kid about maybe what is the reason why they're wanting to avoid something, and hopefully getting
Mhm.
down to the kind of core fear of it. If it feels
Mhm.
like the reason is related to an obsession for OCD, or a prediction that something bad could happen,
Right.
or that they won't be able to handle it, that would be something I'd encourage you to have them challenge themselves with.
Right, to check in with what they're feeling, maybe their
Mm-hmm.
physical symptoms or sensations. You could ask,
Yeah.
right, to check in and see, okay, is your stomach, one thing with kids, right, is like stomach
Yeah.
issues or headaches or just not feeling well because they don't know
Yeah.
exactly how to describe it, and just kind of
Mm-hmm.
zeroing in, okay, what exactly are you feeling? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then, deciphering that way. But I think encouraging somebody to kind of move forward into what they're feeling anxious about is usually a good thing. It just is a matter of
Mm-hmm.
how do you support, because it can feel really
Yes.
much like shoving, and that's not going to be helpful either.
Yes.
That might bring up a lot of resentment or anger and frustration. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but how do you, right? So, how you kind of make sure that you're being supportive without, pushing too far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's talk about support.
Okay.
So those are some things not to do. We don't want to
Yeah.
reassure or accommodate. But what we do want to do is be there through the process for our loved
Mhm.
one. So if they are in therapy and they're doing these exposures, these things that cause anxiety for them, ideally, like we talked about last week, that's going to be kind of a medium level of anxiety. So the things we
Mhm.
want them to encourage them to do are going to be that mid range activities. So maybe if going to gymnastics is something that causes them like a 10 out of 10 for anxiety, it wouldn't be very supportive to, force that.
Right.
And
Right.
maybe just driving to the parking lot is something that they can tolerate for the day. So really
Mhm.
doing it in a gradual way can be supportive and encourage them to challenge themselves while also being mindful that they're not ready for the hardest thing yet.
Right, right. That part's so important. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I hope I'm not skipping ahead to what you might already be saying, but would it be helpful for a parent to check in with the child as far as their level of anxiety
Yes.
for something? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we don't want to mind read. So as much as you
Yeah.
can, like asking what level anxiety that they're at, and just kind of going from there based on
Mhm,
what they feel like they can tolerate.
mhm. And I do love that you gave that example of going into the parking lot as something maybe like
Yeah,
a step towards, because it
yeah,
doesn't mean that you just don't do the thing potentially, but it
right.
might be, okay, what would bring it down, right? What would bring it down from a 10 to maybe more of that range you were talking about of 4 or
Yeah,
5? And maybe
yeah.
that means that that you walk them in, or that you stay that day, but the next day or the next time you kind of pull back and figuring some of those things out.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Another way that can be really helpful for kiddos or adults that are struggling really in the moment of
Mhm.
just a high level of anxiety from their OCD is to walk them through a breathing exercise. So, again, this is not to reduce the anxiety in the moment, but just to help them go through that experience. And breathing can be really helpful to kind of re regulate and be able to challenge themselves or kind of think logically about what to do next. So,
Right.
what I like to instruct people is, really slowly, maybe about 4 seconds in, 5 seconds of an exhale out, whatever works for you. Everyone's a little bit different. But doing something together that can help them really feel re-regulated is helpful.
Right. I love that because it's something simple that we can all do. But at
Mm-hmm.
the same time, it's very effective and powerful. And
Mm-hmm.
at least from my experience, I don't know if you feel the same with clients when they're starting those breathing exercises. They might not exactly work right away, but as you
Mm-hmm.
practice, it could only be
Yeah.
one breath, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
yes, and it's something they can always have with them, that they can always return to, and like, okay,
Yes.
I'm going to spend some time with myself, bring my heart rate down, activate the
Mm-hmm.
parasympathetic nervous system,
Mm-hmm.
and there's some calming. Yeah,
Yes.
I love that.
Yeah, it's a very portable skill. So I think
Right.
everyone breathes, everyone can do
Yeah.
it, which is just really great to have.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So other do's and don'ts.
I think keeping it simple is best as far as how to support.
Mhm.
Again, we don't want to get in the way of their ability to experience anxiety. So, breathing is great because it's not too distracting, but it is helpful to get down from those really high levels. And then from there, exposure therapy is pretty simple. We just want to let time pass and let the
Right.
anxiety be there. So sometimes being just another person in the room can be what's most supportive for your loved one.
Mhm. Mhm. Yes, I love that. Just being there can sometimes be enough,
Mhm.
because a lot of it they're gonna have to, right, like learn how to be okay with anxiety. It's basically that work is, how do I be friends with with the
Yeah,
scary thing that isn't really scary when you start to realize what it is.
right.
But the
Exactly.
avoiding makes it so much bigger.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep. You hit the nail on the
yeah.
head.
Yeah. So, Julie,
Yeah.
is there anything else you want to add, or any other resources, anything we didn't touch upon today?
Yeah, as far as resources goes, I wanted to share that iocdf.org, so the
Hmm.
International OCD Foundation, is a great resource for parents or spouses or people with OCD. They've got videos, books. You can look up therapists that practice exposure and response prevention. They have a yearly conference that you can attend. They've got lots of different things. So going to that website, they have a special section for kids with OCD as well there. Can be a great resource. There's also a
That's
book that I would recommend. It's called Loving Someone with OCD. It's by Dr. Karen Landsman, and that
great.
can help support kind of that journey that you go on with your child or spouse that has OCD.
Oh, that's wonderful. Okay, so I'll put that
Mm-hmm.
in the comments for
Okay.
anyone, some links so that you makes it nice and easy for people to find
Great.
those things. Those resources are great. I feel like that's, I
Yeah.
mean, I've never read that book, but it sounds like I might be reading that book. It's really, sounds like it's a good resource.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Awesome.
Because everyone needs to be supported, even those, that are being the supporters.
Right, right. And
Hmm.
that brings me to one more question I have. So
Yeah.
if you're working with a client, is it something where a spouse or parent could be included in that treatment, and how do you do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think having whoever's in the home in for a session, every now and then to first educate them on, what is accommodation and why is it not helpful, is really powerful to make sure that that treatment continues at home. It's not that they have to be included in every session, but getting that initial education and then kind of checking in on how progress is going and
Mhm.
if they've been having struggles with holding up, their end of the support, that can be a
Right.
really great way to involve the whole family.
Yeah, I think it just would make treatment so much easier and recovery so
Mhm.
much easier, because then that person, that loved one, knows exactly what to do and that they're also
Yeah.
being held accountable, so I think
Yeah.
that that would be really useful.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, thanks again, Julie. I really
Yeah,
appreciate your taking time to meet with me today.
of
So, if
course.
any of you would like to speak with Julie, set up an appointment, just go to shoresideTherapies.com. Also on Facebook, we have all of our information. You can text or email or call, whatever is easiest for you, and you can schedule right online as well. So, thanks again, and we'll talk soon.
Okay, sounds good.
All
Bye-bye.
right. Take care. Bye.